My husband is convinced I am pregnant. I'm not, but he won't believe me. What should I do? Imagine waking up one day, and suddenly the person who knows you better than anyone else starts treating you like you're someone you're not. They insist you are carrying a secret, one that you have denied repeatedly. And every time you correct them, it only gets worse. This story begins with love but twists itself into confusion, denial, and a journey of trying to find the truth amidst an unsettling delusion. Let me take you into the life of a couple who lost their sense of reality, only to find themselves once again through heartbreak, doubt, and genuine connection. The story begins innocently enough. My husband, Tom, and I were in the midst of a relatively quiet period in our lives. We had discussed children. Of course, we always wanted to start a family. But we had decided to wait until we were financially stable, emotionally prepared, and ready to take that next step. However, things took a sharp, unexpected turn after a seemingly harmless comment I made about being tired one evening. "I'm just so exhausted lately," I sighed, flopping onto the couch after a long day at work. Tom glanced at me, his eyes widening with excitement. "Are you pregnant?" I laughed, brushing it off as a joke. "No, of course not. Just tired, that's all." But to Tom, this wasn't just a fleeting moment of fatigue. It was a sign. His mind had latched onto the idea. And by the next day, it was as if he had made up his mind that I was pregnant. At first, I thought it was adorable, his enthusiasm about the possibility of us having a baby. But soon, it stopped being cute and turned into something unsettling. He would place his hand on my stomach, whispering with hopeful eyes, "Our baby is going to be so amazing." His voice, tender and full of love, broke my heart each time I had to say, "I'm not pregnant, Tom." He wouldn't listen. I took a pregnancy test just to reassure him, showing him the negative result. I thought it would put an end to his fixation. But instead, he dismissed it with frustration, insisting that tests could be wrong. He refused to speak to me for the rest of the evening, retreating into a stubborn silence. That was the first time I truly felt something was deeply wrong. I tried to rationalize his behavior, convincing myself that he was just excited or that perhaps it was his way of pushing me to start our family sooner. But it wasn't that simple. His conviction turned into obsession. He would talk about our future child as if it was a reality, filling in details that didn't exist: their laughter, their tiny hands, the color of their eyes. It was as if he had dreamed it all. And now he couldn't wake up. One night, when he placed his hand on my stomach again, I snapped, "Tom, you need to stop this. I'm not pregnant. You're scaring me." He pulled away, hurt in his eyes. Without saying a word, he left the room, choosing to sleep in the guest room that night. It was as though we were strangers, living in separate worlds, and I was losing him to something I couldn't understand. I tried talking to him, but every time I mentioned that I wasn't pregnant, he would shut down. He acted like I was lying, like I was trying to hide something from him. I even wondered if I had unknowingly done something to cause this. Was it something I said or some sign I gave him without realizing? Or was it something deeper? The next day, I decided to reach out for help. I thought about calling his parents, but I hesitated. How do you explain to someone that their child is losing touch with reality? That they're so consumed by an idea that they're pushing the person they love away? Instead, I called a therapist and scheduled an appointment for both of us. I knew I couldn't do this alone, and I hoped that someone, a professional, might be able to reach him where I couldn't. As days passed, I felt a growing distance between us. Tom was no longer the man I married, the caring, understanding partner who knew me better than anyone. He was lost in his own narrative, one that didn't involve my voice. One evening, after another argument, he finally broke down. "Why are you lying to me?" he asked, tears streaming down his face. "Why won't you just admit it?" I stood there, stunned, unsure of how to respond. "Tom, I'm not lying. I swear to you, I'm not pregnant." He looked at me with such a deep sadness that it made my heart ache. "But I feel it. I know it." It was then that I realized this wasn't about me anymore. This was about something inside him, a need, a fear, a desperate longing that I couldn't quite understand. He needed help, and I was determined to get it for him, no matter how difficult it might be. We went to therapy together, though it wasn't easy. The first few sessions were filled with silence, anger, and frustration. Tom didn't want to be there. He was convinced that I was the one who needed help, not him. But slowly, bit by bit, The therapist began to peel back the layers of Tom's obsession. It turned out that Tom's fixation on me being pregnant was tied to his own fears of losing control. Fears of not being ready when the time came. Fears rooted in his own childhood. He opened up about his past. About how his parents had struggled when he was young. He had always felt like he had to be the perfect child to make up for the difficulties his family faced. He wanted so badly to create the perfect family, to be the perfect father, that he had projected all of his hopes and dreams onto me. Without even realizing it, it was heartbreaking to hear him talk about it, to realize that his obsession had come from a place of love, of wanting to create something beautiful. But it had also come from a place of fear, of wanting to control something that couldn't be controlled. The road to recovery wasn't easy. There were moments of relapse. Times when Tom would slip back into his old ways, talking about our future child as if they were already here. But each time, we worked through it together. Therapy became a safe space for us. A place where we could be honest with each other without fear of judgment. I also had to work on myself, on understanding my own fears and anxieties. I realized that I had been so focused on trying to fix Tom that I had forgotten to take care of myself. I started journaling, meditating, and focusing on my own well-being. It wasn't just about saving our marriage anymore, it was about finding myself again. As time passed, things began to change. Tom started to let go of his obsession. He began to see me again, not as the vessel for his dreams, but as his partner, his equal. We started talking about our future again. But this time, it was different. There was no pressure, no urgency. We were just two people, in love, trying to figure out what came next. We decided to take a break from trying to conceive. Instead, we focused on ourselves, on our relationship, on finding joy in the present moment. We traveled, explored new hobbies, and reconnected in ways we hadn't in years. Slowly, the tension that had built up between us began to fade, replaced by a deeper understanding and appreciation for each other. One day, while we were sitting on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, Tom turned to me and said, "I'm ready whenever you are. But if it's just the two of us forever, I'm okay with that too." It was in that moment that I knew we had made it through the storm. We had faced our fears, our doubts, and our insecurities, and we had come out stronger on the other side. It wasn't about having a child or creating the perfect family anymore. It was about being together, loving each other, and embracing whatever the future held for us. Our story is far from over, but we've learned to take it one day at a time. Whether we have children or not, whether our lives go according to plan or take unexpected turns, we know that we have each other. And for us, that's more than enough. The day I fought back how a strict supervisor learned a lesson in humanity. Imagine being forced to reveal your most vulnerable moments to the world, even when you explicitly asked for privacy. This is a story that begins in the quiet corridors of a university program and escalates into an unexpected confrontation between an overzealous supervisor and a determined student battling a life-threatening illness. If you've ever felt like the world demanded too much from you when you had nothing left to give, this story will resonate deeply. This story is about a student fighting cancer who was put in an impossible position by her supervisor, Miss M. As you read through, you'll find the power of resilience, the unexpected satisfaction of revenge served in the most poetic way, and important lessons about empathy, respect, and the boundaries that should not be crossed. Our protagonist, let's call her Jane, was diagnosed with a rare form of ovarian cancer at the beginning of the year. Despite undergoing surgery and chemotherapy, Jane managed to keep up with her commitments at university. She was part of an ambassador program where students with high academic standing worked a few hours each week, in exchange for having their tuition covered. For Jane, this program was not just about financial support, it was about having something normal to focus on. Something to keep her connected during the difficult journey of fighting cancer. Jane was private to the point that even some of her closest friends didn't know about her illness. Her supervisor, Miss M. A stickler for rules, made things increasingly difficult. Miss M. was not the type of supervisor to understand nuances or special situations. She followed the rules strictly, sometimes to the point of absurdity. For instance, she insisted that the ambassadors clock in on Microsoft Teams by typing, "I'm here," and "I'm leaving," turning what could be a simple timekeeping task into an endless sea of redundant messages. Jane tried to suggest an automated time clock feature, but Miss M shot it down, accusing Jane of undermining her authority. The real conflict came one Monday when a virtual meeting was scheduled with the dean of the college. The meeting was a big deal, as it was to be live-streamed on the university's website and YouTube channel. Miss M sent out an all-caps email demanding that everyone have their cameras on for the entirety of the session. The email was so dramatic in its phrasing that it almost came across as a joke. Students must have their cameras on and phones off. Repeat. Phones off. Cameras on. Jane chuckled at the melodrama but felt uneasy because she knew she had a conflicting doctor's appointment that day. Jane wrote back to Miss M explaining the situation and requesting permission to keep her camera off. She sent follow-up messages but received no response. She messaged Miss M directly on Teams, and still, nothing. Monday arrived. Jane was in the hospital, hooked up to monitoring devices, wearing the standard hospital gown. It wasn't the type of situation anyone would want to broadcast. As the meeting began, Jane noticed her supervisor was quick to jump in and remind everyone, again, that cameras needed to be on. Jane typed out a message in the chat, reminding Miss M of her request. This was when things escalated. Miss M called Jane out by name, in front of everyone, demanding she turn on her camera. Jane felt her face flush. She could hear the steady beep of the EKG machine next to her bed. All eyes, at least those on camera, seemed to be on her. It was at this moment that Jane remembered a conversation she'd had with Amy, one of the nurses. Amy had joked that if Jane ever needed to prove a point, she should just turn the camera on and show exactly what she was dealing with. The idea seemed absurd then, but now, it seemed like poetic justice. Jane adjusted her laptop, making sure the camera captured not just her face but also the entirety of her situation, the tubes, the machines, the bleak hospital room, and then she did it. She turned the camera on. The screen shifted, and Jane's image was now the largest on everyone's display. Thanks to the active speaker view, the EKG beeped audibly in the background. Jane spoke, her voice deliberately shaky, a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Miss M, as I mentioned in my previous messages, I am unable to turn on my camera today due to a private medical situation. However, I understand the importance of virtual engagement in this new era of learning. The dean, clearly taken aback, quickly intervened. Jane, you're absolutely allowed to turn your camera off. I apologize for the misunderstanding. Jane smiled weakly, thanked the dean, and turned the camera off. The meeting continued, but not for everyone. Miss M left the call. Jane noticed that another participant, Anthony, Miss M's boss, also exited the meeting shortly thereafter. In the aftermath, Jane received no direct communication from Miss M. There was a strange sense of calm that followed. Jane wasn't someone who typically sought revenge, but in this case, she felt that she had stood up not just for herself but for anyone who had ever been pushed too far by someone in a position of power. It wasn't about humiliation, it was about making it clear that everyone has limits. And that empathy should always be the guiding principle, especially in an educational environment. This incident offers a powerful example of why empathy and understanding are critical in leadership roles. Miss M's insistence on enforcing the rules without any consideration for individual circumstances showcases a failure that goes beyond mere incompetence. It is a failure of basic humanity. When people are in positions of authority, whether in academia, the workplace, or elsewhere, they must remember that rules are guidelines meant to help, not weapons to wield against those already struggling. In reflecting on Jane's story, it's crucial to consider similar examples where strict adherence to rules led to unnecessary conflict. Consider the story of an employee named Mark who, during the COVID-19 pandemic, had to work from home while taking care of his elderly parents. His supervisor insisted on daily video check-ins, even though Mark had explained multiple times that his parents' health required his full attention during certain hours. Mark eventually complied, joining a video call while visibly distressed as he tried to assist his mother in the background. The sight made his colleagues uncomfortable, and it ultimately prompted HR to step in and revise the policy. The rule wasn't bad, it was the rigid enforcement without considering human needs that made it problematic. Another example involves a high school teacher who insisted that all assignments be submitted online by midnight on the due date. with no exceptions. One student, dealing with a family emergency involving an ill sibling, missed the deadline by an hour. Despite the student's previous excellent record and a detailed explanation of the situation, the teacher refused to accept the late submission. This led to not only a lower grade but also a significant hit to the student's motivation. Later, when the issue was raised with the school administration, the policy was amended to include exceptions for emergencies. But the damage to the student's confidence had already been done. These examples illustrate a common thread. Authority figures often forget the human element behind their decisions. Jane's story stands as a stark reminder that sometimes enforcing a rule isn't worth the harm it causes. Rules should serve the people, not the other way around. The core lesson from Jane's confrontation with Miss M is the importance of empathy in positions of authority. When leaders act without understanding the circumstances of those they are responsible for, they risk losing not only respect but also the opportunity to genuinely support and uplift others. Jane's act of turning on her camera wasn't just about compliance, it was a powerful statement about vulnerability, strength, and the expectation of basic respect. If you're a leader, a supervisor, or anyone in a position of influence, take this as a reminder. The people you work with are not just entries in a log or faces on a screen. They have stories, struggles, and lives that sometimes need a little understanding. Empathy doesn't mean ignoring the rules. It means knowing when to bend them to avoid breaking someone's spirit. Jane's courage in standing up to Miss M is something that can inspire all of us. Whether it's at work, at school, or in everyday interactions, remember that behind every rule is a person. And sometimes, what people need most is not enforcement, but understanding. Thank you for reading Jane's story. If you found it moving or insightful, consider sharing it with someone who might need a reminder about the power of empathy. And as always, be kind, because you never know the battles others are fighting. I got fired for accidentally being an asshole to the company owner's disabled daughter. There are moments in life that change everything, often in ways we never expect. Imagine for a second that you're finally starting to find your groove at a new job, just getting settled in, making a few friends, and feeling like you're on the right path, when one innocent comment sends everything crashing down. This is a story of an unexpected twist of fate, and the surprising friendships and wisdom that emerged from the wreckage. It all started during a quarterly company retreat, a supposedly light-hearted event filled with team-building exercises and creativity sessions. The narrator of our story had recently joined a company as a sales representative. After 3 months of diligently proving himself, he was eager to make an impression. Fresh out of training, his days were filled with the usual anxiety of someone trying to make a mark in a new workplace. He was still trying to figure out the company's culture, learning the unspoken rules, and understanding his coworkers. And just as he felt he was beginning to understand it all, a mistake turned everything upside down. On the day of the retreat, the office was buzzing with activity. Employees from satellite branches joined the main office for a day of bonding, problem-solving, and fun. Among the attendees was Amy, the daughter of the company owner. Amy had a disability that affected her motor skills and her ability to communicate clearly. She was well known in the company, though many people often misunderstood her. For the narrator, this was one of his first real interactions with her. The retreat started off well enough. People were laughing, working together, and even competing against each other in small teams. One of the events involved coming up with creative pitches for potential clients. Each team had to create something, a jingle, a slogan, or even a drawing, that would help sell their product to an imaginary client. It was meant to be a fun exercise, and everyone was encouraged to think outside the box. The narrator was assigned to create a jingle, and he poured his creativity into it, even putting his voice to work for the recording. It was lighthearted, catchy, and funny. The rest of his team contributed their own parts, each one trying to make their pitch stand out. As the team members reviewed each other's work, everyone laughed and provided feedback. It was easygoing, and the camaraderie made the narrator feel like part of the group. After completing his jingle, the narrator felt confident enough to join the critiques for the other teams. One particular pitch caught his eye, a crude drawing, somewhat simplistic, for the same potential client he had prepared his jingle for. Feeling comfortable in the moment and thinking everyone was still in a joking mood, he made an offhand remark about the drawing, saying something like, Well, at least my jingle was better than that. Did a 3-year-old draw it? He laughed, expecting the room to join him. Instead, silence filled the space. People looked away awkwardly, some visibly wincing. The narrator's boss leaned over and whispered that he should go back to his desk immediately. It was then that he noticed Amy, the owner's daughter, was the artist behind the drawing. Her face turned red, and tears began welling up in her eyes. That single careless comment had shattered the atmosphere. The narrator was stunned, feeling his stomach drop as the reality of what he had just done began to sink in. He hadn't known Amy drew it, nor had he known about the unwritten rule, that everyone was always supportive of Amy's work because of the challenges she faced. This rule wasn't about false praise, but rather about encouraging someone who had been dealt a difficult hand in life, and who still tried her best to contribute. After the incident, the narrator was called into his boss's office. The boss spoke gently but firmly, explaining that the company wasn't the right fit for him, since he was still on his probationary period. They had decided to let him go. It was swift, and before he even had time to collect his thoughts, security was called to escort him to his desk to gather his belongings. In less than an hour, he was out on the street, jobless, humiliated, and overwhelmed. That night, the narrator received a call from some of his teammates, inviting him for a drink. They knew he must have felt horrible, and they wanted to explain. At the bar, they shared with him the background on Amy, her struggles, her courage, and why she was such an important part of the company culture. They admitted they should have warned him, but it was something they had all taken for granted. Everyone just knew. The narrator felt a mix of emotions: anger, regret, and shame. He felt angry that no one had prepared him for this, but mostly, he felt ashamed for what he had done, even if it had been unintentional. Over the weekend, Amy sent him a friend request on Facebook. The narrator hesitated. He was torn between wanting to apologize and the fear that he might make things worse. After some reflection and encouragement from his best friend, he decided to accept the request and apologize. He wrote to Amy, telling her how sorry he was for what he had said. He explained that he hadn't known, but that wasn't an excuse. He simply wanted her to know he regretted his words deeply. Amy responded, thanking him for the apology. She even apologized herself, saying she felt bad that he lost his job because of her. The narrator was taken aback. He hadn't expected her to be so understanding. They ended up chatting for hours. Well into the night, Amy opened up about her life, about the car accident that had caused her disability, how she struggled to communicate, and how lonely it often felt to be misunderstood. She spoke about how her father, though loving, sometimes made things harder by not understanding her needs fully, like insisting she drink coffee or expecting her to fit into roles that were difficult for her. Through their conversation, the narrator began to see Amy not as the company owner's daughter or as someone defined by her disability, but as a person with her own dreams, frustrations, and resilience. She shared her desire to be more independent, to one day be seen as someone capable rather than someone who needed to be taken care of. She even joked about the awkwardness of her father trying to set her up on dates with coworkers, and how she just wished people would treat her normally. The narrator realized that his mistake, though painful, had led to an unexpected friendship. He saw Amy's courage in a new light, how much strength it took for her to show up at work every day, knowing people saw her differently, and yet still trying her best. He saw the kindness in her willingness to forgive him, despite the hurt he had caused. And he found himself wanting to be a better person, not just for Amy, but for himself. The story doesn't end with a fairy tale twist. The narrator didn't get his job back, nor did he inherit the company by marrying Amy, a joke that some online commenters made, which eventually made him laugh. Instead, he found something more valuable, a lesson in empathy. The understanding that sometimes, the impact of our words is far greater than we can imagine. And the realization that growth often comes from our biggest mistakes. In the weeks that followed, the narrator began his job search, but this time with a different mindset. He no longer saw the firing as an unfair punishment but rather as a harsh but necessary lesson. He stayed in touch with Amy, and they would occasionally chat about TV shows or share funny memes. He even helped her with some ideas for her artwork, encouraging her in the way he wished he had done from the start. In the end, this story is a powerful reminder that none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes, but it's how we respond to those mistakes that defines who we are. The narrator chose to face his error head-on, to apologize, and to learn from it, and in doing so, he not only found a friend but also discovered a better version of himself. If there's one message to take away, it's this: always strive to be kind. Even when you don't fully understand someone's situation, you never know the battles they're fighting, and a little kindness can go a long way in making the world a better place.